And Kathleen, if you would like to get started. Kathleen Stephenson is my colleague on the GIC board and is going to close us out today with a topic I think there should be a quiz after this one.
Uh-oh.
How to get funded, right? We should really, this is something that we all need, and the men and women in the room all want to know how to make this work, how to get your projects funded. So I think we're closing out with a very provocative topic, and I can't wait to hear what our panelists have to say.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, we did leave this question to the very end because it is a very important one, and we didn't want anyone to miss it. So the questions that we will be discussing in this particular panel are, numerous. And to tie them into all the very rich conversation and discussions that we had earlier today or throughout the day, I think will be very, very provocative. We can ask a question such as, is gender difference playing a role in the chances of being funded? We are probably going to touch on, is it driven by cyclical, structural, strategic issues, or all of the above? Is there sector mismatch in terms of the availability of funding and also the ask for funding? So all these elements we are going to discuss in the next few minutes, and we have two very distinguished speakers to try to sort out these questions. That is Mary Davis and Susan Calla. Mary will start the discussion just to give you a little bit of background. Mary is founded, in fact, the Davis Consulting Group in 1996 and focuses on the implementation of strategy through effective organizational structure. And so we can think in terms of the alignment of business units with strategy. To just give one example, she has had many senior positions in the past. Notably, she's currently she had been the vice chair of Janota Bray & Associates in Chicago. She has also been in Australia. She's currently now chair of the board of trustees of Mount Holyoke, where she has graduated in college. And she's also a senior managing director of Brock Capital, where I have good friends, so it's nice to see that the world is indeed very small. She even spent her junior year in Geneva at the École des Hautes Études Internationales, so that's always very nice to see that we have here quite a diverse background. Susan Calla will then follow up, and Mary will talk about the funding possibilities within an organization. And Susan then will take this dialogue and essentially discuss how do we get funded from outside, if you will. And Susan is a contributor editor for Forbes and a partner at KHX Investments, which has holdings in public and private equity and venture capital. She is also, and this is going to be very interesting and very to the point here, she's also a co-founder of 3 mobile startups. So we will hopefully gain from her expertise and experience. She also has has had a career in Wall Street, having been a senior research analyst for quite a while. And she is at the moment also working on strategic planning studies with faculties at Columbia and also for nonprofit organization with the Harvard Business School Community Partners. She lectures in graduate engineering department at Stanford University. So again, please join me in welcoming two very distinguished speakers, and then we'll start with Mary. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. I come at this presentation from being an organizational consultant and an executive coach. And I coach a lot of leaders who are doing what I'm going to describe here as startups inside of the organization. And I'll explain a little bit by what I mean by that and what that job looks like, and then what the attributes of success are. So why are there such things as internal startups? And some of you may know of these inside your current corporations. They're often in place because of the need for innovation. That would be mostly for competitive advantage, but you're hearing a lot today in this business cycle about the need for innovation. So these are interesting opportunities, particularly for women, to take on these kinds of startup experiences because they give you a chance to run something. People do the internal startups as well for obviously new business revenue, and everyone is really revenue focused right now. I don't care what your segment or sector is, revenue is extremely important. And given the life cycle of many of our current product lines coming out of our corporations, new corporate earnings may depend on new products. So in fact, there is a push on new product development, and where this was right after 2008, you could sort of see a decline in new product development. Now you're beginning to see these functions be put back in place and actually removed from the life of the product manager. So if you are a product manager, you'll want to watch this space rather carefully. There are white space opportunities out there in almost every field. I don't know how many of you are marketers out there, but people talk about the white space as the space right next to your products where you might be able to enter a market. And these are usually great opportunities. But given the corporate structure of product management today and the absolute intentionality of getting the revenue flow from every single product line, product managers are so focused on the performance of their product that they can't see the white space. So in actual fact, what happens is people are being asked to take on jobs around new product development, or they might be called a skunk work, or perhaps they're going to be called an internal startup, but they are really to get a new idea off the ground, a new business concept off the ground. I'm going to intersperse some of my comments here with some actual case studies, then you'll just catch me doing this. And let me just describe in advance two clients that I've been working with. One is a woman at a very large money center bank who was actually recruited in to this money center bank to do a startup. And it's a startup in the transaction services area of this large money center bank, where they want to take advantage of their credit card capability to do a health care credit card, where the insurance company who provides your insurance, Aetna, Cigna, whoever it might be, would have, will you be on the credit card with you, the consumer, and then the hospital system that you use, or the doctor system, or whatever healthcare system we're all going to end up with, which is somewhat indescribable at the moment, will be able to, you sort of use this credit card, but actually all the information gets aggregated into this transaction report, and you as a consumer have a record of what happened with that transaction and all of the insurance pieces that go back and forth. It's actually a very novel idea. But she was recruited in to do this, and I'm going to describe in part how she has coped with this job, particularly being an outsider coming in to do a startup. But this would prove true, I think, for anyone doing a startup internally, because you need to get the same kinds of sponsorship. So let me tell you about this. So I've got what I call the 6 key success factors, and I'm going to take you sort of through those. One is to really to be able to articulate and really well describe this new product or this new service. And here's where anecdotes will not work. This is where you need good market analytics. You need some consumer surveys. You need to know, is there anybody in this competitive space? And you really need to put together the case for this unmet market need. And by unmet market need, I really mean one that isn't being met out there now by someone else's product or service. It's a term used in marketing, as some of you may know. I also think in the sense of the internal competitive peer space, particularly if you are a startup for a new product area, you're going to be working with existing product managers. And one of the key things to figure out in your business plan is, are you in fact transgressing across any overlaps with other products that get into the same space? Because that starts to create peer difficulties very quickly. So you need to do that in your analytics as you're setting up your business plan. And then I think you need to really, really understand what your argument is for this innovative revenue generation. People are looking for this revenue to come in the future. Today, people are out between 3 and 5 years to actually break even and get a good return of investment on a startup like this. So you've got to get your numbers right. So use your finance skills to build a business plan and understand where revenue generation is going to fit in here. Preparing the business case, obviously that unmet market need is at the front end of that. What we did in the case of this startup in the Money Center Bank is we spent a long period of time figuring out the costing in transaction services that a credit card such as this would actually require. So a lot of analytics, a lot of cost projections, and then of course if you have to build a platform, which in this case we did, what's the cost of building the platform, and in fact can you use internal resources to do that, or are you going to have to use external consultants coming in to build that platform? I do think it's important to know how much capital you're going to need, and I'm sure this is going to prove true in the case for the entrepreneurial startup as well, which is not corporate sponsored. But you really do have to have a good sense of how much capital, because you're going to make a capital request somewhere to a committee that is tagged with allocating capital to projects such as this, or to existing products for their own next version. So you're going to be competing for capital and probably competing for talent, which is another piece here, is actually getting the right talent in place to get a startup off the ground. And the startup talent, I might tell you, is a different kind of talent than you might find in many existing product management groups. This is going to need to be pretty agile talent, multitasking to the extreme, and the ability to do more than one job. In other words, a more diversity of background is better than less, because you're not exactly sure who you're going to need to send where to do what. So you want people who can multitask and who in fact have a fair amount of experience, sort of what I call running with the ball, without necessarily a total game plan, because it's a very entrepreneurial type of work. The one thing I will say we ran into at this Money Center Bank was the real need, and this was where it came across with the negotiation panel that we just had. And this proved to be true as a woman leader. This woman was extremely good at getting money for her cause, which was this particular startup. And having her ducks in an order to actually write the business case in such a way that it was compelling. I think it needs to be compelling. It was going to be a new offering in the market, and it was going to provide new revenue for this particular bank. But it was necessary at several points in time as this case got reviewed up the ladder that she absolutely had to stand firm her ground to not get that capital number reduced. In other words, don't take a capital reduction if in fact that's what you need to be successful, because the lack of a $100,000 or whatever it might be, particularly if you're building out a technology product, might be the kiss of death. You just might not be able to get it into production. So we were really, we did a lot of coaching around holding your ground and making your case for getting the money that you need to invest in a new product startup. This has come up several times before. I think this is probably, when I do executive coaching, I say this is the #1 thing I look at in terms of female success in the workplace, is who are your sponsors? Where are the centers of gravity in the universe you work in, and how are you going to get known by them and sponsored by them so that in fact you can be successful just about in anything you want to do. I really think these critical players you've got to cultivate the relationships with. In this case where at this money center bank, this woman actually came in from IBM, where she actually was on the client relationship side, and you'll see where that leads in a minute and why this might have been a good idea. She's also a technologist. It turned out that she didn't have any sponsors other than the people who hired her at this particular bank. So we had an intentional strategy that we needed to have sponsorship in IT. We needed to have sponsorship in sales. We needed to have somebody in finance that could be the go-to person in finance. And we actually drew out a map of how she was going to get from the people she knew to the people she needed to know to have the sponsors to get this capital request approved. And this was like a 6-month journey to get this all done while she was in parallel creating the business plan. Okay, so this takes, these 6 steps might not all be in sequence. They might be in parallel. But we women are good at multitasking and doing things in parallel, and that's why we are very good project managers for this kind of a thing. So the one thing we did have trouble with were the peers. And that was really interesting, and that's why I said sometimes you get into you start to rancor your peers because they believe in the long run. Unfortunately, they're going to have to share the pie with you. In other words, if there is a capital budget of, let's say there's a capital budget of, let me use a $10 million number, and there are 5 products currently, and they're each getting $2 million each. Suddenly, there are going to be 6 products for that $10 million, and somebody's going to have to give up some money. So they all get very antsy right away about is it really necessary that we do this new product development piece? Is this startup really going to make money? And they're the ones who begin to put all the question marks into the environment. So you need to try to befriend them, and you need to try to cut them off. So you have to have 2 tactics. One, get them close to you so you know what they're thinking. And secondly, know how to fight them when in fact they get in your way, particularly when it gets to the allocation of capital. I'm sorry, I missed one slide here. That was my lineup and cultivate the sponsors. As I said, they're in the logical places that you would look for them, but get that plan. And then the 4th thing, I think, is you've got to build your execution capability. The key to a startup is getting the execution right. First get the business plan right, but then execute. And once you've got your capital, you've got to get this off on time, and you've got to deliver on your product. So you really need to identify and fill those key roles, and we talked a little bit about the agility of that team. But the last thing you need to do, and this is a leadership thing for women in general, but you usually have it, and I saw it in the room today, it's all over the place, you're sitting out there, the old Nike swoosh, just do it. Lead with energy and lead with commitment, because if you don't do that, the team will not follow, and others will notice that you're not committed to this product startup. So it's really a critical attribute. Number 5, and this is true, I don't care what business you're in or whether you're in a startup, focus on revenue generation. It is the most important part of corporate growth right now, and so it's really important to do that. But in a startup situation, you, the leader, are in fact the chief relationship officer and the chief of sales. Okay, because you are the embodiment of this startup, and you are the person who's selling it both internally and you're selling it out to the client. And so in this particular case at the Money Center Bank, she was able to sell out to Aetna and Cigna and to the Hospital Corporation of America by dint of her past relationship skills with those companies, partly, but secondly because she was able to take with her technical people who were building the platform, who could talk to the technical people of Aetna or the technical people of Cigna, so that they got an idea how the system would work and how it would actually bring benefit to them as a business. So lots of loops of product service feedback there that allowed her to continue to refine the product. And the last thing which she was really clever about, and this is very hard to do, particularly if you tend to really listen to the client and want to try to satisfy their needs, you've got to avoid making the transaction any more complex than it is, particularly in your beta stage. In other words, when you're in beta, try to stay with vanilla. Don't have chocolate, strawberry, and pistachio, because you're trying to get it through a beta stage and you're trying to prove your concept and you're trying to get revenue in the other side without making this so complex that you're continuously tinkering and customizing a technology platform, and you spend all your time and money on technology versus getting the revenue out the other end. So I like to keep it simple, stupid. You know, that's the old KISS piece. And then the last thing I would say is always know you as a new product developer, as an internal startup leader, you're going to exit this phase. One way or the other. This is not going to be a job probably that lasts for a very long time. But what it does do is give you P&L experience. It gives you all this business case experience and the client relationship that you want. And it also gives you exposure and visibility. And that's sometimes what you're looking for. It's a great career experience if you have the risk-taking tolerance to get out there and really have a job that is going to be full-on for, it's probably an 18-month to 2-year assignment to get one of these off the ground. But know at the end you're going to exit. You may be absorbed by another line of business that's going to take on this product and sell it, do the sales for it and take it on. That's what's probably going to happen in this particular instance with this transaction service. I think the credit card group is going to take this one on at the end of the day. On the other hand, your unit may not survive all these corporate rivalries for capital, and therefore there might be an opportunity to spin this thing off. So I can tell you one of the strategies that this leader and I had was, if this isn't going to get continually funded going forward, what are our other options? So one of the things she was doing in parallel is getting out there to private equity conferences just to make sure that there was a potential exit strategy. So unless all of you are not interested in this, this is a great place to go if you have the risk-taking capability and the leadership attributes to go off and do your own thing. So I encourage you to think about it if the option arises. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mary. So now we have Susan, who will be looking at and talking to us about the external funding. So we had internal with Mary and external now with Susan.
Well, I really liked the idea of doing this presentation, in part because it's really part and parcel of what I work on. So I am involved in 4 different startups, and I'm co-founder on 3, and then I'm an advisor on another one. And all of them are looking for funding, and all of them get very different reactions from different sources of funding. So I decided to do a formal case study on some very successful funded companies, and I wanted to look at the ones that were funded by outside venture capital and the ones that were funded internally. And I looked at 4 different companies. 2 of them were funded by venture funding, and then 2 of them were funded internally by the founders. And I looked at, I had a hypothesis going into them that the women that were funded by the outside sources would be more successful than the ones that were funded internally. And I found that it was actually the opposite. So, and I actually did kind of a rigorous study. And the best part about the study was the 2 companies that I used venture capital input from. I had to call one person, Ashton Kutcher. So I got to call him and ask him about the companies that he had funded with women leaders. And I asked him about, what had happened with it. So Ashton actually invests through Andreessen Horowitz, which is a Silicon Valley-based venture fund. And Mark Andreessen started Netscape, and he actually started, the search business on the internet. And they are the most prolific funders. They fund 100 different companies a year. So I got to talk with all of them, and then I compared those cases, the venture-funded ones, with some very successful people and some very handsome movie stars. And I compared that against 2 companies that I know very well that were founded by friends of mine, and they were both internally funded. So. And then just to give you some background, I do a lot of, I do funding myself, and I'm an engineer and a coder, and I go to hackathons, and you spend the weekend developing a product. So I've worked with a lot of teams of programmers, and I've worked with a lot of, PhD, MIT types, and I've come to the conclusion that if you're working with a team, and you're working on a product, if you develop the product first, it's going to take you 6 months. And if you develop the product first, then look for funding, you're going to have a problem. Because you can get a team together, but if you're not going to pay them, they're not going to stay longer than 6 months. So if it takes you 6 months to develop the product, then you go to market, then you've already got people antsy, and they're getting kind of, they're coming up with questions as to whether the company could be an ongoing concern. And the problem is, if the coders start to leave after 6 months and you haven't made sales and you haven't secured financing, then the coders will take the code with them. So then you have to start all over, and it becomes a big problem. So the one thing that was echoed over and over again when I talked with the successful people was, if you're going to go to venture funding and you're going to do a big piece of work, a big company, a big project, then sell the concept. You can't sell the product. You won't have time to do the product and get the money. So get the money and do whatever you can to prove the business case or prove that there's demand. So whether it's taking out ads in Google for products that don't exist yet and showing the click-throughs, or whether it's getting customers to talk about how much they like the product, you have to do all that before you have anything on paper. It's just the way it works. You don't have very much time to get this very expensive talent to work with you on and follow your vision if you don't have money. So I did it the other way and learned the hard way after the coders left. But anyway, when we started to get religion and understand we had to get the funding first, we started going out to different kinds of angel funders and billionaires, and we found some really interesting things. The angel funders had a very limited geographical scope, and they had very, very limited scope in what they were interested in funding. And generally, they were all looking for young guys in hoodies in dorm rooms because they got that thing about Mark Zuckerberg, and so they thought that was going to work. So you could, if you walked into the room and they were looking for Mark Zuckerberg, that wasn't going to be the case. So then we started looking Then we tried, more self-funding, and we started going to trade shows and trying to sell the stuff ourselves, and it became really, really expensive, and you find that all of the customers want to fine-tune it, and you have to do analytical work and big data work, and so that wasn't working. Then we went to a billionaire, and he was interested, the problem was he was interested in stuff that was way out. So he was interested in financing banks in Africa. So that didn't work. And so then we went to some angels that were interested. They were really new in the process, and they didn't know what they were doing, so we really liked them. And then they were just, they had decided to just basically fund 1 out of 10 of everyone they see rather than 1 out of 100. And they were slicing up things very narrowly, slicing up the money that they had available very narrowly. So you didn't get much money, but you got some money. And so, as they say, some money is better than no money at all. So we did do that with one. So, but it's really discouraging when you're looking for money and these headlines come through all the time that, 16-year-old boy gets $30 million from Yahoo. And you go, what am I doing? But then since I write for Forbes, in addition to running an investment firm, I was able to use my Forbes hat and call the people that were involved in Sumley, which was the Yahoo venture that was funded for $30 million. And it turns out that actually what had happened was a venture capitalist came in and gave this 16-year-old some money, and he also found people at Stanford Research Institute, SRI, that were PhD programmers that had invented Siri. So actually those people wrote the code for Sumley, and they took a big portion of the $30 million when it went public. But none of that showed up in the headlines. And so it's very deceptive because, the programmers on your team will think that there's going to be a, $3 billion payday in 3 weeks, and it's just behind these big money headlines, there's a lot of work. And there's a lot of people that know what they're doing, and there's a very close network. So beware. So, but anyway, in looking at my own experience and looking at some of the, the question of should women follow the money? Should women do what men do? Should they go for the venture capital? Should they go for that 30 million, 1 billion payoff? And so I took a look at, when I was talking with Ashton and some other venture capitalists, I took a look at what they fund, and then took a look at where men kind of focus and where women focus in their careers. So the venture capitalists all funded B2C, business to consumer. B2B, business to business. So that was tech, pharma, finance, and energy, and they mainly funded tech. So where are women? Well, they're in B2C. They're in consumer businesses. They're in consumer goods, media and entertainment, publishing, and healthcare. They're not in STEM. So by nature of that, it's going to be it's difficult for them to get funding. And then I took a look at, well, maybe it's different for the elite MBA women. So I talked to a McKinsey partner and said, when you go in to recruit people, a McKinsey partner that was leads the tech group at McKinsey. I said, when you go to recruit these people at Harvard and Stanford, who shows up in the room? Do any women show up? And he goes, never. He goes, there's not one woman in the room. I go, well, where are they all? He goes, the media guy is mobbed, but there's not one single woman in the room. So in order of preferences, the women are in media and consumer goods, even the elite women, and men are in tech and finance. So the men get it, it's easier for them to get funded simply because they're where the money is, and the women have a very, very hard time. So we took a look at, the different, in funding options, what are the different kinds of funding and what does it mean? And something that really jumped out, you can self-fund and that's for small amounts of money. You can use angel financing, and that's for like intermediate sums of money. And then you can use venture capital when you have a bigger business idea and you really need to get big money to support plant development or a big rollout. So, and it's interesting, whoever puts in the money last is the one that ends up with ownership and control of the company. So, and I found that the problem that women frequently do when they're self-funding is they take on debt. They'll just go to the bank and take a loan. If you take on debt, it's likely your business is going to be over in 3 years. And then when the angels and the venture players come in, they all take preferred. So the owners have common, the venture people have preferred, and so the preferred always outvote the common, so they have de facto control even if they haven't worked out control with you. And the exits for self-funded were primarily liquidation, and you didn't get to the big exits in frequency until you got to venture capital. But even then, it was surprisingly, the success rate was surprisingly low, less than 50%. So we also we started talking to venture capitalists about what their experiences with women were. Like, if these women that are in consumer goods actually do get funding, what happens? So the angels told us that their average returns are 30 to 40%. The returns on women-led businesses are 95%. So it's like, well, why don't you do more of these? Well, they just don't show up in the room. And the ones that actually do get through are so good, they're mind-blowing. So, but even so, the women portion of the deals was very small, 5%. And then the women that got venture capital, they all got put off by the management fees and the carries of the venture investors. For those, when you go into that stage of funding, when you go into venture capital, and you're dealing with these people that are wearing really, really nice suits and have a house in the Hamptons and are driving a Ferrari, you're paying for it. So some of the women that saw all that just got indignant about it and said, you know what, I'm going to find another way. I'm not giving everything. I'm not going to work for everything and give it to this guy so he can get another red Ferrari. So then I looked at in understanding the funding and what the pros and cons were, I looked at the financial performance of the companies that were funded by venture and those that weren't. Over the long term, what do the revenues and profits look like? One of the Andreessen companies is Data Gravity. It's a woman leads it. She sold a business to Dell for $1 billion, and she's got a great track record, and it's a big data analytics company. And she's gotten $40 million so far, $42 million, no revenues. And she won't be profitable. She won't have revenues until 2014, and she expects to be profitable by 2017. And she expects the venture capitalists, as soon as she's profitable, for them to push her to exit. And she doesn't have control of the company at this point. So, I mean, she's happy to be in the business, but she had some reservations about how much she had to give up to really pursue her dream. Julep Beauty is a new cosmetics company, and she manufactures her own green cosmetics, and she's launched it. She has $10 million in revenues. She took out she got $27 million from venture capitalists. She doesn't have profits yet. She has 176 people, and she had some concerns about having all these people working so hard to get in. And she said she was able to get to all the venture capitalists because she went to Princeton and also has a law degree from Yale. But she feels like, she really, really pushed to get in, and she's really pushed in her business, but at the end, she's not going to be an owner. So she had some reservations about that. Then I looked at two companies that were funded by friends of mine. One is Catalyst Learning. It's in Louisville, and it teaches staffs at hospitals. She has about $6 million in revenues. Oh, I'm sorry. She has about $3 to $4 million in revenues, and it's profitable. And she owns 60% of the company, and she'll operate it for perpetuity. So she's investing in the long term and just continues to see, see it as an ongoing concern. She doesn't have to sell it. There's nobody pressuring to do that. And then another one is, these are the people that went into the consumer goods. Another one, Ballet Petites, is a dance school in Washington that has costumes, music. It's a very involved dance school for girls that are 2 to 5. She has $10 million in revenues. She owns the company completely. It throws off a couple million in free cash flow. And she's as happy as a clam. She's going to operate it forever. And she has no management overseeing her. She has no board. And she dances and plays with little kids all day. Sounds good. That consumer, there's something about those consumer goods that sounds better and better. So after hearing those, I came up with my own CALA happiness index. And I evaluated people on, I'm in a long-term marriage, and I'm very happy with that. So I think long-term things are good. I dated 1 million people, and I was never happy with them. So long is good, short-term is bad. That's just how I see it. It's digital to me. Majority ownership, control, those are good things. Comp that exceeds $500,000 a year, that's a good thing. And being able to also monetize when you exit, sure, you want to get out of it, you can sell it. You can do that whether you own it yourself or whether you were VC funded. So when I looked at the internally funded companies, Catalyst Learning and Ballet Petites, they got yeses across the board. They get a score of 4. When I looked at the externally funded companies, Data Gravity and Jewel Beauty, they got a 1. Case done. I'd go for the internal funding. So I did get a picture of Ashton to share with you. And so when I chatted with him and his people, they said it's very important when you're getting external funding to focus on a concept, on a context, not just focus on an idea. Sell something that you can't drop on your foot. And they said, all of them said the same thing across the board. They said women are perfectionists, and it becomes a problem when you're trying to move really fast with teams that are impatient and a lot of money. So you can't be a perfectionist. And pedigree is really important, as is networking. So you can't get in the door if you don't have a pedigree, and you won't ever get introduced if you're not in the network. So you need to do, if you want funding, you need to work on those things. And you always have to sound confident. They said always use the words will, can, and if anybody asks you if you can do it, you say, of course, not sure, I don't know, yes, yes, yes. And then they said you need to prove the business plan. You don't present a business plan. You have to have the proof that matches. It has to be data points. And you need a pro forma, but you don't have to spend a lot of time on it. Just get a part right. And then you need to have an articulate 5-year vision. On the other hand, if you're a dancer from Ballet Petites, you need a magic wand with some feathers. And you could be making $10 million a year. So Nancy Parenti, who's the founder, it said it was most important in her early years to have her cost be 0. So she started the school in church basements and in community centers, and she never paid rent. She didn't pay rent for the first 4 years. She made sure that she had so many bells and whistles on this dance school. They taught ballet, but she also had these beautiful costumes that she made herself. They were spectacular, like the one she has on. And she found all these beautiful books of fairy tales, and then she choreographed the fairy tale and matched it to operas. So she taught the kids, classics, she taught them literature, she had beautiful costumes, and then on the costumes, she made the backs Velcro, so they'd fit anybody. If you had a fat kid, it didn't matter, they just use the Velcro. And so she had so many people coming that they started lining up the days for registration, and the mothers started sending the dads because they were afraid they'd get closed out, and they thought the dad could be more aggressive about getting the little girl into the class. She has 3,000 students at all times. She has 40 employees. And it was founded in 1996, and she'll keep going at it forever. Lynn Fisher is the founder for Catalyst Learning. She teaches the aides at hospitals. She puts them through a certification program that she came up with. She's very happy doing it. She's been self-funded since '98. She has 12 employees. She owns 60% of the company because she made some mistakes in the beginning. But she has $2 million in equity and $4 million in revenues. So my vote goes for the internally funded for women. And as Lynn said, there's some comfort in being master of your own fate, albeit maddening at times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. I think that we are, we kind of exhausted our time. So I am going to just say one conclusion, which is that this leaves me with a very puzzling question, and namely that not thinking out of the box is probably the solution. Not taking risk, is it the solution? So that for you to ponder. And I'm not sure whether we can have one question. Mary, you will be the arbiter of that. One question from the audience, and then we'll conclude.
Hi, I'd like to know how crowdfunding has played a role in this. If it has crowdfunding.
Oh, crowdfunding. It's, it's the latest thing. Half of the funding is for women. Sorry, half of the funding is going to women for crowdfunding. And, there's lots of professionals that are, giving cautionary tales about it. But it's like microfinance, and it looks good to me. It's, otherwise you end up in these rooms with these billionaires that, sit back and say, explain yourself. I think sometimes you just need to get out there and do it.
Okay, so I don't want to overstate our welcome here because it is getting late. Mary, maybe we can move on to conclusion. And again, I just want to thank Mary and Susan for these wonderful remarks.
Thank you, ladies, very much. That was really informative. I really enjoyed it, and I thank you for all the work you put into it. A quick housekeeping note. Anybody here getting CFA credit, you must give your form to a member of the GIC staff. Here's Amanda. There's Jill. And they're happy to take it from you, but you need to hand it in before you leave today to get that credit. And this gives me a perfect opportunity to thank Amanda, Jill, Ben, and the entire GIC office for all the work they did to put this on today. Thank you so much. Now, this is, as you all know, our inaugural women's conference, right? And thank you for making it happen, because it wouldn't happen without all of you. And I want to say, this guy standing next to me here, Dom DeGento from PNC, was a super early adopter to this conference and did so much work to make this conference happen. Worked the phones, helped with panelists, helped with funding, everything to help make this conference happen. He's not a vice chair, he's a co-chair, but he wouldn't take a co-chair title for this. And I just want to let him say a few words of why he felt it was so important as a board member of GIC to really back a women's conference. So Dom DeGento.
Sure. Thanks, Mary. And to start off, I just wanted to thank each of you as participants for dedicating an entire day to the GIC. Wanted to thank each of the speakers that were involved. I mean, for many of the speakers, probably at least 10 or so, this was their first GIC event in terms of being a speaker. And of course, would love to thank SAP for being a sponsor. Without their support, it would have been very difficult, if not impossible, to put together the type of program that we did. So like Mary mentioned, the genesis for this was probably a year ago. And Mary's objective for this program was always to have this event be about making greater awareness of the GIC for women. That's always been what the objective was. And we wanted to do that by simply reaching out to women that were prominent in what they did in their careers and having an opportunity to talk about their success with people that would want to come. talk about issues that are relevant for women and for men. For those of you that are attending your first GIC event today, we'd encourage you to learn more about the GIC, to consider becoming a member. As you go through our website, you'll note that the topics of our program include central banking, inflation. We talk about health care, food and water issues, talk about natural resources and energy, shortages, challenges around that. We talk about investment management, economics, financial services, and we talk about international business relations and international business in general. As befitting the name of our organization, we're global in nature. So we've done programs in no particular order: Argentina, Chile, the United States, France, Ireland, Sweden, Italy, Ghana, Zambia, South Africa, Poland, the Czech Republic, Israel, Japan, China, Vietnam, and Singapore. The GIC was founded in 1976, the year of our bicentennial, and the mission, and George Chekos had talked about this morning, our mission is to encourage the expansion of global dialogue and free trade in order to improve cooperation and understanding among nations with the goal of reducing international conflicts and improving worldwide living standards. So everything that we do is about dialogue. We're a neutral convener, so we convey no opinion. We present speakers and then let you decide. And we hope that you learn from these meetings to go out and work to make the world a better place. So Mary, I want to thank you for leading this event. Thank each of you for spending a day with the GIC, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully at future events. Thank you.
So I'm sorry we had to cut this panel short with Q&A. If you have questions for any of the panelists, please take the opportunity to speak with them afterwards. We have a few minutes before they kick us out of the building, so take full advantage of that. And many thanks to so many of the board members who helped make this event possible, participating on panels, bringing in panelists, and we still have in this audience several male board members who made sure they brought guests here today, so I thank you all for coming and being part of it. Have a great day.